Hi Eddie, how you doing today?
I'm fine. How are you?
Not bad, not bad. I love your
Do you,
background.
do you prefer Matt or Matthew?
Matt is great.
Okay.
Yeah.
And who says that's a background? Just
Yeah.
kidding. Wishful thinking on my part, but keep going. I'm sorry.
We might get some background noise here in Manhattan. There is a lot of construction going on and ambulance and stuff, so I might have to hit mute. Maybe we'll get to the notion of noise pollution at one point in the conversation, but I just want to jump right in.
By the
You
way,
you
I want to begin with an old joke about Manhattan, but it's really about New York writ large. But since you mentioned Manhattan noises, I'll just start. There's an old saying that goes, Manhattan would be a great city if they ever finished building it. So it's just,
That's
and that's
amazing.
and that's a joke from the 40s, brother, something like that. So please keep going. I'm sorry.
Definitely true today. So, for folks who don't know much about environmental justice, you head up the New York Environmental Justice Coalition, and wondering how what's like a elevator pitch definition of environmental justice.
Sure. No, thanks, Matt. So I'm the executive director of the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance. It's a citywide coalition of community-based organizations from the city's most environmentally overburdened communities. Which, if one studies or analyzes just generically how pollution plays out in different communities, it's now become an accepted and there are endless studies that show that there are disparities in environmental qualities. There are differences in environmental conditions that you can pretty much identify along racial lines, also class lines. But a few interesting studies over the years have shown that if you compare, say, a middle class African American community to a low income white community, that in fact, even with those differences in class and income, that you will find often that the middle class Black community has greater environmental disparities than even low income white communities. So yeah, there's clearly a correlation with income, but folks who study this and have lived this life
Yeah.
recognize that racial dynamics are an even greater indicator of environmental disparities. So
Yeah.
we see as an alliance, we see our mission to basically identify all of the different structures, regulatory, legislatively, et cetera, that contribute to environmental disparities, the systemic causes of those, try to both identify what those are and then dismantle them. And that's our mission.
I definitely want to follow up with you on that question of the structures and the policies in place, the specifics on those. But something you said really stuck out in the definition of overburdened communities. And I know in environmental justice, social justice work, it's really important to think about, to imagine what a good situation would be like, what an ideal situation would be like, because we get, the overburdenedness and the negatives around us, can wear us down. And so I wonder what it would look like for a community to not be overburdened, to be just at, a working level or a good level of, environmental justice. And have you seen that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's in some ways almost an impossible question to answer, because every community is different. Every community has different ambient. I was going to say in Spanish, different environmental conditions that intersect and overlap in different ways, depending on the community, how they are as receptors. What is the level of environmental and public vulnerabilities that communities have. So there is, I don't think, and I would even I would love to see if anybody could. I don't think that there exists a model environment, like there is no environmentally, okay, put this, there's no one environmental standard, one size fits all for all communities, as to like this is the model that we should aspire to. And part of it is because the environment is what it is, right? Like there's no despite like some people's love for walls and how walls like the environment is free floating. It moves,
Right.
whether it's air, it's water, it's soil. Soil is
Yeah.
the least, but whether it's air or it's water, it's not confined to one
Yeah.
rigid location. But when you talk about the clusters of impacts, those become easier to both analyze, model, and then identify ways to reduce those disparities. So I guess the real answer is how, rather than what is, probably the better question is not how do I make my community a model environmental showplace, but what are the factors in my immediate environment, and depending on how you define your community, what are the aspects in your environment that you can measure or you can quantify as a disparity, and then what do you do to kind of reduce those disparities? So it's a great question. It's a one would love for there to be a utopian answer to that, but there isn't. Like really, what your job as someone who cares about the environment is to look at what your immediate environmental challenges are, and then work with your neighbors and other stakeholders to improve those. And of course, there are clear, like there are Clean Air Act standards, there are clean water, so there are scientific and regulatory levels that one could look to, but I prefer not beginning with that, because that kind of analysis is designed to disempower. It's designed to not include and attract people to be active. So you'll get to those standards, but the very first question is, what is it about your immediate environment that you can tell, or you can easily measure, or you can go to websites and check what are the conditions, and then try to identify with stakeholders how you address those.
Yeah, that sounds great. And on the regulations and the policies in place, like they are arcane and difficult to sort out. And I actually, just out of camera view, I do have, I don't think you can see, I have a Power Broker about Robert Moses. One of the, of course, it's the book stands out in the bookshop. I don't know, so it's just one of those things. So so there's lots of things to dismantle that Moses set up. But I want to know, if you could give an example of a community you've seen that started at that zero baseline level and started started like doing that grassroots level work.
Absolutely. So I look at some of our members and what they've done over the years, whether it's in the South Bronx, specifically say like the Hunts Point area, where it's a neighborhood in the South Bronx. People often forget the South Bronx is not one neighborhood. It's a region of the Bronx, of which at least 12 neighborhoods could comprise what's known as the larger South Bronx. And Hunts Point is one of those neighborhoods. And I think it's got like between 12 and 15,000 residents. But it also is home for a range of toxic, polluting infrastructure. And it's also the home for the Hunts Point food markets, right? So the produce market, the Fulton Fish Market, which is still called Fulton Fish Market, but it's now obviously in the South Bronx. The meat market, these markets that make up what's called commonly the Hunts Point food markets they constitute actually the largest food distribution hub in the United States, the second largest in the world, right?
Wow.
So these markets, the Hunts Point markets, which operate out of New York City EDC-owned properties, basically handle the food for something like 23 million people in the region, right?
Wow.
Like the tri-state area. And so, for example, when Sandy hit, what most people don't realize is the body of water that surrounds Hunts Point and of course the markets is called the Long Island Sound. It's the far edge of the Long Island Sound when it hits the Bronx, and so the Long Island Sound the tides for the Long Island Sound were actually at its lowest when Superstorm Sandy hit. Had Superstorm Sandy hit 12 hours either direction, basically, if it had hit when it was high tide for the Long Island Sound, the mayor's office and other experts have confirmed that the Hunts Point food markets would have been overrun, like the water would have basically crusted and exposed probably the entire peninsula. And what that also means is that our food supply for New York and the surrounding tri-state area, that our food supply would have been disrupted, and nobody knows for how long. So so think of, like, we have basically, that's our breadbasket for the Northeast. I mean, there are other kind of food hubs, but that is the main and the largest again in the United States. That is a use, and our breadbasket is surrounded by toxic, polluting infrastructure, sewage plants, power plants, heavy chemical and oil distribution facilities. Like, do we really want, as New Yorkers, to have our food surrounded by brownfields? But that is the reality of how urban developments happen in not just New York, but cities all over. There has been all kinds of progress that the Point and other members of the South Bronx have been able to win over the years. They stopped the siting of a sludge plant. They stopped the siting of a medical waste incinerator. They have engaged with the city to begin, and they're in different stages of what's called the Hunts Point Vision Plan. They were able to bring something like $40 million, a combination of city and federal money, to build out energy infrastructure to make energy resilience a key dynamic, so that if and when there is another severe weather event, that the markets can continue to function. So that's just one example of a neighborhood that has organized and has improved, air qualities. There's a ton of work to do still, because it's like we tell people, Rome wasn't built in a day, so it's going to take it's going to take decades to dismantle these systems. But like, just to give you like the latest example, so 2 months ago, the governor, now the newish Governor Hochul, announces in her first State of the State that she is going to work on the full electrification of the Hunts Point markets, which is huge, because we're talking about something like 15,000 diesel burning trucks in and out of this community every week. So what that means is that we could clean up that whole fleet. At the same token, the New York City Economic Development Corporation, which operates these facilities, they're also embarking on a modernization of that facility. So not only will the Point be able to work with these agencies to help reduce those emissions, but it also opens up opportunities for things like community-owned solar to be deployed on some of the same footprint. I can give you, and the most kind of like probably the biggest example of EJ groups turning challenges into opportunities was in Sunset Park, when uprose after a 7-year battle with Industry City that was looking to significantly rezone the manufacturing working waterfront that this community relies on for jobs, and they were trying to rezone it for commercial and high-end uses. Uprose led a coalition and for 7 years fought that rezoning proposal. And what ultimately happened was Industry City realized they were going to lose. They pulled their rezoning application last year, and literally within 2 months, the state of New York announced that they were going to build the first and largest offshore wind assembly facility on the Eastern Seaboard, right? Like, that would not have been able to happen had Uprose not beat back an enormous gentrification displacement push in that community. So I can go on and on, but there are multiple examples like
those are great examples. Yeah, thanks. And I want to ask more about those and others that you've seen over the years, and how those tactics could be helpful for other communities. I'll just pause, here for the end of part one. So just give me 1 second, and we'll come back to dig into those.